I have now had my first experience with disk rot. I'm currently making a video where I'm replaying the Spider-Man PS4 game, and I pulled it out and looked at it, and I noticed a little bit of discoloration around the edge, but it wasn't super severe, so I didn't think too much of it. I popped it in, the PlayStation recognized it, and it proxied a download, and then it started copying files from the disk. And it would get to about halfway through, and then it would say that it's going to take like 100 hours or something to finish copying, and then it would just fail, and it gave an error code. So I looked up the error code, and it said something about the disk being dirty or something to that effect. So I washed it, and I retried multiple times. There were no visible scratches on the disk. I mean, the disk was in really good shape other than that discoloration around the edge. I retried multiple times, and every time I got hit with the same error code. PlayStation 4 games use Blu-ray discs, which are supposed to be less susceptible to disk rot. DVDs and CDs have a reflective layer that's made out of aluminum, and the term disk rot is a general term for the degradation or discoloration of the reflective layer, usually a result of the aluminum corroding, causing the data to become unreadable. The most common type of disk rot is just the natural degradation of the disk itself, which leaves the reflective layer vulnerable to degradation. This is those pinpricks and spots that you normally see in pictures of disk rot. A bacteria called Geotrichum candidum was found to consume the protective polycarbonate layer on DVDs and CDs, making them much more vulnerable to disk rot and potentially causing the aluminum layer to be open to the elements. The rot on my disc is a lot less common form, but it's seemingly the most prevalent in Blu-ray discs. It's called bronzing. There are many criteria on Blu-ray discs that suffered from this type of rot due to improper pressing at the factory. These start oxidizing around the edge and eventually take over the whole disc and make the disc entirely unreadable. Disc bronzing is the fault of a manufacturing defect rather than the natural degradation of the disc over time, as manufacturers of Blu-ray discs claim a lifespan of 100 to 150 years rather than a DVD's 20 to 30 year lifespan. In my case, the data that tells the PlayStation 4 what the disc is unaffected, meaning the game works on my brother's PlayStation because it was already downloaded there. With most modern games, after the game is downloaded off of the disc, all the disc is really used for is for the license verification. Disk rot is interesting in the discussion of media preservation. If you have the means, it's relatively straightforward to back up your DVDs or CDs of the movies and TV shows and music that you love. You can put your DVD into a computer and take a copy of the disc image. If you wanted to, you could just rip the video file, putting it in a more versatile format. But if your main concern is preservation, then taking a copy of the whole ISO image will preserve all of the extra content and menus and subtitles and things like that. If you're really worried about preservation, you would want to make a copy of all your DVDs and CDs and store them on a server with multiple redundancies so that if a drive fails, you don't lose all of that. Then once you notice that one of your discs is getting disk rot, burn a new DVD with that movie and put it in the case. That way, if all of your drives happen to go bad, you can just make copies of all of your DVDs again. Or if all your DVDs just all rot at the same time, you'll be able to make new copies of those discs, and they'll function exactly the same as the original version. This is really the only way to actually preserve your discs, but it requires maintenance, and setting up a server isn't exactly cheap, and it's not necessarily easy depending on what functionalities you want the server to have as a whole. So that would take care of your movies, TV shows, and music, but what about your games? Backing up games can be much more complicated. In my collection, I like to have all original hardware, and I don't really like them to be modded. I'm not necessarily against modding, but I would want to buy another device that I'm buying with the intention of modding it, because I like having the option of totally original hardware. Most video game discs have watermarks burned onto the disc that standard home DVD burners can't replicate. Meaning if you make a copy of the ISO image and you burn it to a new DVD, it's just not going to boot. There are a lot of things you can do to back up your games and make them playable, but they're not going to be playable without either mods or emulation. There are a lot of things you can do to back up your games and make them playable, but they're not going to be playable on original hardware without mods. You can always rip your games and put them on your server that you already made and only play them with emulation. It's an option. It's not even a bad option, but if you're a purist, it's not going to be super enticing to do that. If you are a purist, there's not much you really can do to preserve your games. Really, the only things I could have done to make it so that I didn't have to buy another copy of Spider-Man would have been to already have it downloaded on my PlayStation, and then I wouldn't have to buy it again until the disc rot consumed the entire disc and the PlayStation could no longer recognize it. Or I could have just bought it digitally in the first place. I like buying physical games for preservation, and to ensure that even if the world ends or I don't have Wi-Fi anymore, I can still play the games that I bought. There are a lot of people doing a lot of great things in the game and media preservation world, and a big part of the game preservation conversation is about digital games. I think a lot of these people who are saying things don't really care about preservation, and they're kind of just saying these things because they think they shouldn't have to pay at all for any games. But that's a conversation for a different day. There are a lot of people who have really good points about digital and online only games. The interesting thing is that at least in this specific case, my game would have been more preserved if I would have bought it digitally in the first place. And in the modern time, it's kind of easier to preserve your digital games than it is your physical games. You can buy all your games digitally and store them on an external drive. If you felt so inclined, you could even have 2 copies of that drive. Then, if your system were to go down and be bad, you could get a new one, and then all of your games would still be stored, downloaded on that external drive. You still would need internet, which is the main issue, but you'd only need internet for a little bit to link to your PlayStation Network or Microsoft account. Then when you hooked the drive back up, all those games would be there downloaded on your external drive. And if you did make 2 copies of the drive, then if one of them were to fail, you would still have the backup. If the storefront were to get shut down, you would still be able to log into your PlayStation Network or Microsoft account, and it would be able to verify that you actually did purchase those games, even if the storefront's down. This is most likely true because they aren't going to shut down the account network servers because they use that same system in their newer devices. This doesn't work for older games for obvious reasons, and all in all, it's kind of pointless anyway. Because unless we're talking about a doomsday scenario, you're probably just going to have internet. So you wouldn't need to back up your modern games in a way that still requires internet. What happened with my Spider-Man game is a huge fluke, especially because it's on a Blu-ray disc. But it does kind of suck that all this game preservation talk might be for nothing when inevitably all of these discs are going to rot and fail and become totally useless. And for your DVDs, it's gonna happen sooner than you might think. It just does suck that there's not a good way to back up your video games without using emulation like there is for DVDs and CDs. For your Blu-ray discs and stuff like that, it's not something you really have to worry about that much. If it keeps happening, especially if it keeps happening with the same title, like if a lot of people start noticing that their Spider-Man games are bronzing, then it might have been like a widespread manufacturing defect that only really affects that game specifically, or games that were being made at the same time or from that same factory or whatever, because Blu-ray discs are meant to last much longer than DVDs and CDs. So outside of your old like PlayStation 2 games, I think PlayStation 3 games were Blu-ray also, but outside of your PlayStation 2 and earlier and Xbox 360 and earlier, you don't really have to worry about it as much. And a lot of those older titles are kind of widely available for emulation online. You can just download them and get them. So if your discs start to rot before you're able to make a copy, there are illegitimate ways where you can obtain a new copy without having to buy one on the third-party market, because, you know, there are no PS2 games like in print anymore. But that's the end of this one. So let me know what you think of the video. Have you heard of disc rot? Did you know it was a thing? It is just a fluke that it happened with Spider-Man, but I did have to buy it again. And it's kind of funny. I made a joke to my older brother because he had never heard of disc rot either until this happened and I was talking to him about it. I've now had more physical games become unplayable than I have digital games or online service games. So that's just something I found humorous with the discussion about game preservation and, you know, live service games and all that kind of stuff, is that my physical games have failed more. But that's going to be it for this one. Just, you know, like, subscribe if you feel like it. Let me know what you think. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.